Cluck stepped through the coop entrance, water dripping from his comb in rhythmic drops that betrayed no assassin's grace. To the untrained eye, he was merely a rooster shaking off the damp chill of a drainage tunnel. To himself, he was the bantam, emerging from the flooded belly of the enemy stronghold with wet feathers and a heart full of cold calculus. The water pressure had been a variable he could not control, but it had served its purpose. He dropped a packet of damp parchment onto the nesting box where Henrietta stood sentinel. Intercepted during egress, Cluck clucked, the sound sharp and deliberate. Safehouse terminal purged, command codes secured. Henrietta hopped forward, her eyes narrowing as she assessed the waterlogged rooster. You look like you lost a fight with a raincloud, dear, but the data. The data is pristine. Mother Hen's signature is on every line of the neural harvesting authorization. Cluck ruffled his wings, sending a spray of droplets across the straw. The parchment bore the official seal of Agri Shell, stamped in ink that smelled faintly of ozone and betrayal. However, the extraction triggered a secondary alert. I retrieved these before the fire suppression systems engaged in full. Winston waddled out from behind a stack of feed sacks, his snout twitching as he sniffed the parchment. The pig adjusted a pair of spectacles perched precariously on his nose. Agri Shell Holdings, he grunted, scanning the text with a paw-mounted decryption rig. I've cross-referenced this with the supply manifests. It's not just a raid, it's a foreclosure. Cluck tilted his head. Foreclosure. Legal seizure via eminent domain loophole, Winston corrected, tapping a claw against a screen displaying shifting ledgers. A syndicate proxy corporation has filed paperwork to seize Muddington Acres. They've exploited a zoning discrepancy in the Agricultural Preservation Acts. The pig's snout twitched violently as he processed the bureaucratic horror. The legal timeline is tight. They hold the deed of transfer. If this isn't contested within 48 hours, the farm becomes theirs by court order. Mother Hen isn't just sending drones. She's using the law as a weapon to bypass your combat protocols entirely. Henrietta let out a low hiss. She's trying to buy us out while her assassins are still in the air. That's cold even for the roost. Before Cluck could calculate the risk of a legal team versus a tactical strike, the coop door swung open. The farmer bustled in, carrying a clipboard and wearing an expression of unshakable optimism that defied all logic. Good news, everyone, the farmer beamed, oblivious to the tension thick enough to spread on toast. I've finally sorted out the deed presentation paperwork. The land registry clerk is waiting at the manor house. Cluck froze mid-shake. Henrietta stopped preening. Winston's decryption rig whirred louder in the silence. "The what?" Cluck clucked, his voice straining against the absurdity. "Deed presentation," the farmer chirped, consulting his clipboard with manic enthusiasm. "It's scheduled for exactly 4 o'clock this afternoon, but oh bother, I've just realized the vet is coming at 3:30 to check on Gerald's teeth." He frowned, tapping a pen against his chin. "If I rush the presentation, I might miss the appointment, and if I miss the vet, Gerald gets very grumpy and chews the fence posts again. But if I stay for the vet, the deed presentation runs late. That would be terribly rude to the registry clerk." The farmer looked around, confused by the silence. "Well, are you all going to help me move the heavy oak desk to the office? It needs to go there for the signing." Cluck stared at the human. The timeline was a trap of pure incompetence, woven with such mundane threads that only a creature of instinct could have missed the snare. The seizure team would arrive at 4 o'clock. The deed presentation, the only legal instrument capable of validating Muddington's independent ownership, required the farmer's physical presence at the same hour. If the vet interfered, the signing missed. If the signing missed, the seizure became absolute. Immediate countermeasures, Cluck clucked sharply, his eyes locking with Henrietta's. The assassin in him calculated trajectories, the rooster in him wanted to peck the clipboard out of existence, but the rooster knew that pecking wouldn't stop a court order. "Henrietta, we need to secure Gerald and divert the vet immediately. Winston, I need you to forge the registry confirmation using the syndicate's own encryption key. We have 47 hours and 59 minutes before the clock runs out." The farmer blinked, Did someone say cheese? Cluck turned back to Henrietta. The legal deadline is a hard constraint. We cannot let the timeline mismatch destroy what we've built. Countermeasures must be deployed now, or Muddington Acres becomes just another warehouse for Mother Hen's experiments. The farm office smelled of damp wool and impending litigation. Cluck stood atop the mahogany desk, his talons clicking against a stack of documents that threatened to turn Muddington Acres into a parking lot for agri-shell logistics trucks. Beside him, Henrietta adjusted her spectacles, a contraption fashioned from wire and a repurposed thimble, with the precision of a bomb disposal expert. The timeline is tight, Cluck clucked, his internal monologue projecting with the gravity of a midnight briefing. Target, 48 hours until legal eviction. Asset, the inspection team. Henrietta tapped a claw on a specific clause. Here, the structural integrity report, it's the pivot point. She turned to Cluck, her eyes sharp. The proxy corporation hasn't commissioned a survey from a licensed firm. They've hired an independent consultant, Dr. Aris Thorne. Cluck peered at the paperwork. They're banking on the farmer's confusion, he mused. If Thorne declares the Coop structurally compromised, the seizure becomes automatic. No appeals, just a bulldozer. Winston oiled out of the shadows near the feed hopper, his snout twitching as he carried a sheaf of decrypted supply manifests across the floorboards. The pig was less a guest and more a walking hard drive with anxiety issues. Cross-referencing Thorne, Winston grunted, his voice low and gravelly. The courier route matches a supply drop for Geological Solutions Limited. That's a shell, dig deeper. Cluck watched as Winston unrolled the manifests against the light. The cipher patch from their previous operation hummed with verified data. Winston's eyes widened behind his thick lenses. It's not just a surveyor. Thorne is carrying a portable neural scanner disguised as a theodolite. Explain, Cluck demanded, his comb twitching involuntarily. The device emits low-frequency pulses designed to map neural density in surrounding fauna, Winston clarified rapidly. If Thorne gets within 50 meters of your roost box, he could triangulate your command frequencies. He'd be able to spoof Henrietta's orders or lock Gerald out of his own mind. Mother Hen isn't just seizing land, she's harvesting the farm. Cluck felt a chill that had nothing to do with the drafty window. Then we neutralize the scanner before it activates. His mind raced through mechanical possibilities. Direct confrontation was impossible. Thorne would be surrounded by corporate security. They needed chaos. Elegant, structural, undeniable chaos. The property line, Cluck said, his voice dropping to a professional rasp. Phase 1, the diversion, we need Gerald. His structural destabilization capabilities are unmatched, but we need focus. We'll position him near the automatic Coop feeder. Henrietta nodded, her comb bobbing with approval. If we trigger a malfunction in the grain dispensing gears. Precisely, Cluck continued, projecting an image of the plan via their shared command link. When Gerald bites the feeder cables, the resulting short circuit will electrocute a stack of ceremonial farm awards we've positioned near the property marker. Thorne will see a rogue electrical hazard and a rampaging goat. His scanner will overload. And the farmer, Henrietta asked. The noise will draw him, Cluck said. He'll rush out with his first aid kit, completely misunderstanding the nature of the emergency. By the time he realizes the injury is to a silver bowl, the inspection team will have flagged the property as an active hazard and fled. Cluck and Henrietta navigated to the barn perimeter where Gerald was currently attempting to eat a garden gnome. The goat looked up, grass hanging from his jowls. Gerald, Cluck clucked sharply. New assignment. We have a surveyor at the boundary. He is wearing blue. You are to chew the red cable by the feeder. Gerald's ears perked up. Red cable, is it crunchy? It is highly conductive, Cluck assured him, gesturing toward the stack of awards they had secretly moved near the marker post. And if you do this correctly, Henrietta promises the premium grain ration she promised. Plus, the silver bowls will spark. you like sparks." Gerald's eyes went wide with avarice. "Sparks and grain I shall chew with the fury of 1,000 thunderstorms." He bared his teeth at the air. Henrietta turned to Cluck, her expression grim but resolute. "The protocol is set. Gerald is mobilized. The awards are in position. We just need Thorn to drive past the property line." Cluck watched the horizon where the threat of aerial surveillance still lingered, a dark cloud on his tactical display. But for now, the immediate vector was clear. He preened a single feather, his demeanor shifting back to that of the utterly ordinary rooster who merely wanted a quiet morning. "Then we wait," he murmured. "The diversion is finalized. Let the structural loopholes work in our favor." Dawn broke with the screech of tires instead of the rooster's crow. The syndicate conv had arrived 3 hours ahead of schedule, kicking up a haze of dust that coated Muddington Acres in grit. Cluck stood motionless atop the Coop feeder mechanism, his comb twitching as he calculated the deviation. Mother Hen's retaliation was swift. The aerial drones still circled like mechanical vultures, but the ground game required immediate countermeasures. Beside him, Henrietta crouched low, her eyes narrowed in tactical focus. Henrietta tapped a sharp rhythm against the wooden beam, her beak signaling the cipher patch verification complete. The premium grain was traceable to Agri-Shell's supply chain, a detail that would complicate the syndicate's forensic analysis once the diversion concluded. The convoy crested the property line road, lead vehicle a matte black SUV flanked by 2 armored transport vans. There was no time for protocol adjustments. Cluck pecked the release lever with precise metallic clicks. The heavy counterweight dropped. Inside the hopper, premium grain, imported from neutral zones and treated with the cipher patch, exploded outward in a high-velocity arc. Thousands of golden kernels arced over the fence line, raining down upon the approach road like amber hail. The grain struck the asphalt with a sound like heavy rain, instantly drawing the attention of the convoy's perimeter team. But Cluck's true asset was already moving. From the shadow of the barn, Gerald erupted in a blur of chaotic motion. The goat had interpreted the sudden cascade of premium fodder as an invitation to inspect structural vulnerabilities. He charged toward the lead vehicle with the enthusiasm of a freight train on a collision course. The inspector stepped out of the SUV, clutching a device disguised as surveying equipment, a portable neural scanner humming with illicit potential. Gerald paid him no mind. His attention locked onto the lead vehicle's front tire, specifically the digital pressure gauge mounted on the valve stem. To Cluck's trained eye, it was mere instrumentation. To Gerald, it looked like a structural weakness waiting to be corrected. The goat lowered his horns and slammed into the suspension arch. Teeth met metal with a shower of sparks. Gerald began to gnaw violently, applying torque to the shock absorber with surprising leverage, causing the vehicle's nose to dip alarmingly. Cluck observed the goat's performance with cold calculus. While Gerald possessed zero tactical discipline, his chaotic torque applied to the shock absorber was statistically guaranteed to compromise the vehicle's mobility. The rooster calculated 40 seconds of operational window before the suspension failed catastrophically, a margin sufficient for extraction. The inspector shouted orders, fumbling for a sidearm as the SUV's suspension groaned under Gerald's assault. He turned toward the Coop, aiming to deploy the neural scanner to map the rooster's neural patterns before Cluck could coordinate further resistance. Cluck launched himself from the feeder mechanism, wings beating a staccato rhythm as he dove toward the operative. He needed to disrupt the scanner's calibration. Without it, the syndicate's data harvest would fail. Just as Cluck reached apex height, a sudden commotion erupted from the loft vents. The grain barrage had penetrated the Coop's ventilation system, and a flock of startled carrier pigeons descended in a panic. They took to the air directly into Cluck's interception path. The sudden white swarm blinded both assassin and operative. Pigeons flapped frantically, creating a chaotic vortex of feathers and honking calls right over the inspection zone. Cluck was forced to bank hard, his wings buffeted by the erratic avian turbulence. The inspector, caught in the maelstrom, lost his footing. He stumbled backward, dropping the neural scanner. The device clattered against the gravel, shattering its delicate lens array and scattering internal components across the road like confetti. The diversion succeeded, though not without collateral chaos. Gerald remained engaged with the convoy, his gnawing now triggering a cascade of mechanical whines that threatened to buckle the lead axle entirely. The inspector scrambled to recover the scanner fragments, but the scattered components were already lost beneath the hooves of confused chickens drawn by the fallen grain. Cluck landed on the coop roof, panting slightly from the pigeon encounter, his gaze fixed on the compromised operative and the structurally unsound vehicle. The immediate threat was neutralized enough to buy time, but the scattered neural scanner parts now dotted the perimeter, a hazard neither side could easily ignore. The heavy tread of the convoy paused, but not in surrender. Inside the lead vehicle, a man in a grey suit pressed a small remote against his palm. The seizure team's masks dropped away like wet paper, revealing grins stripped of professional pretense. Cluck watched from the eaves of the coop, feathers bristling as the true intent unspooled across the twilight. This was never about property law or structural reports. It was a sonic emitter, designed to drive every living creature on Muddington Acres into a mindless, legally justifiable panic. The air grew heavy with ozone and malice. A low hum vibrated through the roost floorboards, rising rapidly into a piercing shriek that rattled the nesting boxes and sent dust drifting from the rafters. The emitter locked onto the coop's perimeter, its calibration lights blinking a cold, predatory red. Cluck's internal monologue shifted from tactical analysis to pure alarm. He had orchestrated a diversion, not a frontal assault, and the board had flipped beneath his talons. The geometry of the mission had inverted without warning. This was no longer about legal loopholes or paper trails. It was a blunt instrument of psychological warfare, deployed by criminals who understood that panic made people sign papers faster than paperwork ever could. Outside, Gerald was still chewing with enthusiastic abandon. The goat mistook the high-tension fuel line of the lead vehicle for another structural weakness in his grand architectural critique. With a wet, tearing sound, the line gave way. High-octane feed additives sprayed across the tarmac, pooling rapidly around the tires and igniting into a thick, slick sheen. The diversion was working, but in the wrong direction. The road became a treacherous mirror of chemical fuel, reflecting the harsh floodlights of the convoy, while the vibration from the emitter turned the ground beneath his hooves into trembling jelly. Cluck tapped his beak against the hollowed-out timber framing, trying to maintain signal clarity with his tactical partner. Henrietta's voice, usually a crisp stream of encrypted data and sharp directives, fractured into static. The sonic frequency was too high, shattering her localized sensor network and severing their shared command authority. For the first time since the safe house flooding, Cluck felt the weight of solitary command pressing down on his narrow shoulders. He adjusted his stance, ignoring the dissonance in his ears. Tactical comms were dead. He would have to rely on raw instinct and decades of poultry warfare, interpreting her frantic wing flaps as the only remaining language of strategy. He needed to recalibrate, fast. The emitter was climbing toward full power, a rising wail that threatened to collapse the coop's structural integrity along with the livestock's sanity. The seizure team outside was already advancing, their boots crunching on the sprayed feed additive, completely oblivious to the fact that they were walking into a slip-and-slide of their own making. Their formation broke as tires skidded unpredictably across the slick tarmac, leaving them exposed and vulnerable to a counter-strike from above. The wind carried the chemical tang of the fuel line rupture, sharp and metallic. Cluck dropped from the rafters, landing silently on the main perch. He signaled Henrietta through a series of rapid head tilts and tail cocks, compensating for the dead airwaves. She met his gaze, eyes sharp despite the interference. They both knew the diversion was over. Gerald's chaos had bought them time, but it had also painted a target on their backs. The coop door groaned under the vibration of the approaching machine, wood splintering slightly with each pulse as the frequency climbed toward an unbearable peak. Dust swirled in tight circles, mirroring the disorientation spreading through the rest of the yard. while the distant clucking of panicked hens provided a grim soundtrack to the unfolding crisis. The team abandoned any pretense of stealth. Cluck launched himself toward the coop entrance, feathers streaming like grey smoke in the twilight. Henrietta flapped hard, banking left to clear the doorframe, her usual precision replaced by urgent necessity. They were not retreating, they were engaging. The direct counter-assault began exactly as the emitter hit its crescendo, a chaotic rush of wings and talons aimed at stopping the machine before it could finish its work. Every feather was a weapon, every strike calculated against the relentless hum of destruction. The hum of the sonic emitter vibrated through the damp earth, a relentless thrum that threatened to shatter the coop's remaining integrity. Cluck watched from the shadows of the barn cache, his comb taut against the sudden shift in atmospheric pressure. The diversion had served its purpose, but the mathematical certainty of survival demanded more than mere spectacle. He abandoned the high-ground perch and stalked toward the convoy perimeter with the silent grace of a predator who understood the geometry of violence. His gaze locked onto a rusted shopping trolley, a relic from the village supermarket that had been dragged back to Muddington Acres as industrial scrap. It sat idle near a stack of rotting hay bales, waiting for its true calling. With a swift kick of his spurs, Cluck sent it rolling. The iron wheels screamed across the gravel, gathering momentum as it carved a straight, unforgiving trajectory toward the inspector's command station. Inside the lead vehicle, Gerald was already deep in structural engineering. The goat's teeth met stiff resistance as he clamped onto a thick black cable buried beneath the chassis. Metal groaned under the strain of his enthusiastic mastication, each to a testament to chaotic dedication. Cluck calculated the vectors in his mind. The trolley struck the emitter's control panel with a catastrophic clang, showering hot sparks across the inspector's boots. Simultaneously, Gerald's jaws gave way. The main power coupling sheared apart, unleashing a contained storm of raw voltage. Wires whipped like agitated vipers, arcing through the spilled high-octane feed additive that pooled dangerously around the convoy's tires. The electrical cascade was instantaneous and merciless, a symphony of destruction composed entirely by accident and ambition. Sudden silence that followed was heavier than the noise. Cluck regarded the sparking machinery with the detached interest of a man who had seen this exact outcome predicted in 1,000 different tactical manuals. To the untrained eye, it was merely an industrial accident. To him, it was a perfectly choreographed ballet of physics and poor engineering decisions. He adjusted his feathers against the static charge hanging in the air as the sonic emitter let out a dying wheeze before collapsing into silence. The inspector's neural scanner, mounted on a tripod nearby, flared with a brief blue light and then smoked into uselessness. Alarms blared in confused dissonance as the seizure team's equipment shorted in unison. Panic, the universal translator for incompetence, took over the convoy. Drivers scrambled for doors that refused to open, while agents tripped over their own tangled harnesses and spilled toolkits. The immediate physical threat dissolved completely into a tangle of dead electronics and bewildered men in tactical vests. Cluck did not linger to watch the rout. He moved with calculated precision toward the abandoned command station, his claws clicking softly against the asphalt. Beneath a toppled briefcase, he located the confiscated deed documents, their official seals mocking the farm's sovereignty. With his beak, he secured the papers and dragged them toward the barn cache. The inspector's terminal still held a faint residual charge in its backup transmitter. Cluck tapped the power button with deliberate talons, routing the encrypted financial proxy trail through the dying circuitry. A burst of data shot across the electromagnetic spectrum, piercing the temporary comms disruption and landing squarely on Winston's secure decryption server. The data burst carried more than just numbers. It carried the syndicate's own greed, weaponized by their own careless infrastructure. Every transaction logged in that terminal would now serve as evidence rather than a shield. Cluck felt the familiar weight of responsibility settle on his shoulders, though he bore it with the stoic dignity of a creature designed for early morning alarm duties. The legal counterfiling would begin immediately before the convoy's tires even stopped spinning, a quiet rebuttal to the syndicate's heavy-handed approach. Outside, the remaining agents were already dragging their dead equipment toward the exit road. Their vehicles sputtered back to life only long enough for a hasty retreat down the muddy track, leaving behind nothing but deep skid marks and the faint smell of ozone. Cluck stood atop a crate of vintage poultry feed, watching the tail lights fade into the Yorkshire mist. The property seizure was thwarted, at least temporarily. He dropped the deed documents onto the straw near Henrietta's nesting box. Gerald trotted proudly out from beneath the lead vehicle, licking a piece of stubborn insulation from his teeth with unbothered satisfaction. The goat offered a soft bleat that Cluck interpreted as a request for premium grain and structural autonomy. A nod sufficed. The syndicate had lost its on-site enforcement capability, but the war for Muddington Acres was far from over. For now, the farm held its breath, safe beneath the quiet observation of a rooster who knew that professional excellence required absolutely no applause. The high-pitched whine of the sonic emitter died with a final spark, leaving ozone and singed rubber in its wake. Outside the Coop threshold, the syndicate convoy had long since scrambled over the hill, their taillights swallowed by twilight mist. Cluck stood motionless on the warped timber of the feed trough, one claw resting lightly on a shattered control panel. His feathers were ruffled, but his posture remained rigidly vertical. A professional does not slump after a successful operation. The immediate vector was neutralized, and the perimeter temporarily secured. The wind carried the distant rumble of escaping tires, but Cluck ignored it. His focus remained locked on the perimeter. He adjusted his stance, feeling the familiar weight of command settle over his shoulders like a tailored suit. Tactical assessment complete, Cluck thought, the internal narration rolling through his mind with cold precision. Hostile extraction failed. Equipment compromised but retrievable. Primary objective, preserve operational continuity. He released a sharp cluck that translated to an ordinary call for grain. Inside the tactical partnership, it meant comms were restored. A soft squawk confirmed Henrietta's presence on the upper roost, her wings twitching in anticipation. Before they could begin the debriefing, heavy boots crunched across the gravel drive. The farmer rounded the corner of the barn, a steaming mug in one hand and a clipboard in the other, completely oblivious to the high-stakes skirmish that had just concluded mere yards away. He took in the overturned vehicle and scattered survey gear with a cheerful blink. "Look at you, Cluck," he boomed, tapping his pen against the clipboard. "Always keeping the weeds down, proper little watchman. Here's that deed presentation paperwork I mentioned. Just need a witness mark here, and we'll have the county records sorted by Tuesday." He dropped the folder onto a nearby hay bale with a casual thud, unaware it contained an eminent domain seizure order he had just narrowly avoided signing into effect. Cluck regarded the paperwork with calculated indifference. He hopped down from the trough, landed silently in the straw, and released a low clucking pattern that served as a standing order for containment. Henrietta descended to meet him on the lower perch, spreading the seized documents across a flat section of nesting wood. The fine print was dense, legalistic, and utterly lethal. Cluck's dark eyes scanned the clauses, while Henrietta cross-referenced the financial routing numbers with Winston's earlier decryption key, her clause tracing the inked lines with surgical precision. Every inked clause represented a calculated strike against their home, and every frozen account demanded immediate countermeasures. "The ledger is frozen," Henrietta murmured. "Their offshore accounts are locked down, but operational capacity remains intact. They will reroute through shell corporations." Cluck nodded once. The financial network was bleeding, but the patient would survive. They needed to know what came next. Winston trotted into the Coop's interior, dropped a portable decryption rig beside the documents, and tapped the enter key with a hoof. The machine whirred softly, processing the encrypted metadata. The screen flickered, cycling through encryption layers until it spat out a single decrypted packet, timestamped moments before the convoy retreated. Tactical probe complete. Structural blind spots mapped. Geothermal vent network primed for atmospheric displacement. Execute Phase 2. Henrietta's breath hitched, her feathers flaring slightly. Cluck's internal monologue turned icy. The seizure was never about the land. It was a topographical survey disguised as bureaucracy. They were testing our perimeter before striking. He stared at the decrypted coordinates, which pointed directly beneath the foundation of the old windmill. The syndicate had not come for the deed. They had come to map the exit routes before detonating the underground geothermal vent network. "We have time," Cluck clucked softly, the sound carrying the weight of a general issuing orders. Henrietta understood immediately. Her wings straightened, and she turned toward the coop door. The immediate threat receded, leaving behind a chilling silence that settled over the yard like frost. The paperwork on the hay bale was merely a diversion, masking a subterranean weapon aimed at their foundation. Muddington Acres was secured for now, but every eye in the coop turned downward, listening to the faint, rhythmic hum of the underground vent network waiting to be weaponized.